The morning they told me not to come, I was already dressed in my best suit. I had ironed it myself, the navy blue one Alina bought me for our 40th anniversary, the one that still smelled faintly of her perfume if I pressed my nose into the collar hard enough. My hands weren't as steady as they used to be, and I'd nicked my chin shaving, but I looked presentable. I looked like a man who had every right to walk into that building. My son Marcus called at 7:43 in the morning, not to check on me, not to ask if I needed a ride. He called to make sure I understood that the optics of having me there would be complicated. "Dad," he said, in the voice he used when he was about to say something cruel while trying to sound reasonable, "the investors are going to be there. The city council rep, Dr. Hargrove from the hospital board. These are professional people. They don't need to see," he paused. "They don't need the distraction." The distraction, that's what I had become. 71 years old, a little slower than I used to be, and I was a distraction at the grand opening of the clinic I had paid for with every cent of my retirement savings. $320,000, the number my late wife Alina and I had spent 38 years building, every overtime shift I worked at the steel plant, every vacation we skipped, every Christmas where the gifts were modest because the future, we told ourselves, was worth more than the present. When Alina passed 2 years ago, I thought long and hard about what to do with that money. I thought about what she would have wanted. She would have wanted it to matter. Marcus had come to me 18 months ago with the idea. A community health clinic in our old neighborhood, the East Side, where we'd raised him, where people still went without basic care because they couldn't afford it, where children got sick from things that shouldn't still make children sick in this country. He showed me the business plan, the projected impact numbers, the partnership with a young doctor named Priyaire who had grown up 3 blocks from our old house. I had wept, I'm not ashamed to say it. I had sat at my kitchen table and wept because it was exactly the kind of thing Alina would have clapped her hands together for. I signed the papers that same week. I never asked for my name on the door. I never asked for a seat on the board. All I asked was to be present, to see the thing come alive, to stand in the room where sick children would one day be cared for and feel, just for a moment, that Alina and I had left something behind that was worth leaving. Marcus had other ideas. Over the months, the calls became less frequent. The updates dried up. When I asked questions, I got vague reassurances. When I asked to visit the construction site, there was always a reason why this week wasn't good. By the time the ribbon-cutting invitations went out, I received mine in the mail, not a phone call, not a personal delivery, but a card in an envelope with my name typed on a label, the same as everyone else. And then the morning of the opening, the phone called. "It's not that we don't appreciate everything you did," Marcus said. "We do, but today is about the future, Dad. It's about moving forward." I listened to him finish. I thanked him for calling. Then I hung up the phone, looked at myself in the mirror above the hallway table, the one Alina had found at a flea market and repainted yellow because she said the hallway needed something cheerful, and I made a decision. I would go, not to cause a scene, not to embarrass anyone. I had a different plan entirely. The clinic was on Alderman Street, in a building that used to be a pharmacy before the chain stores drove it out. They'd done a beautiful job with the renovation, big windows, a mural on the side wall painted by a local artist, a garden bed along the entrance with flowers that wouldn't bloom until spring, but were already reaching upward anyway. I sat in my car across the street for a few minutes and let myself feel proud. Whatever had happened between Marcus and me, this building was real. This building was going to help people. Then I got out of the car and walked around to the back entrance. 2 months earlier, when Marcus had stopped returning my calls, I'd reached out to Dr. Priyaire directly. I'd found her email through the clinic's development website and introduced myself simply. "I am the man who made this possible, and I would like to meet you." She had called me back within the hour. We had met for coffee 4 times after that. She was exactly what I hoped she would be: sharp, warm, carrying the particular kind of purpose that only comes from having grown up watching people suffer things that shouldn't be suffered. She'd told me about her mother, who'd gone without a proper diagnosis for 2 years because she didn't have insurance and was too proud to say so. She'd told me about the night she decided to become a doctor. I told her about Elena. By the third coffee, she knew everything. By the fourth, we had a plan. The grand opening was everything Marcus had designed it to be, polished and professional and perfectly managed. There were maybe 60 people in the main hall, a string quartet near the entrance, trays of food that looked more suited to a downtown fundraiser than a community clinic on Alderman Street. The city council representative gave a speech. Dr. Hargrove from the hospital board gave a speech. Marcus gave a speech in which he thanked the generous donors who had made this possible without once using my name. I stood in the back hallway the whole time, next to Dr. Nair, and listened through the cracked door. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. It hurt the way things hurt when you've lived long enough to know that some pain doesn't arrive as a surprise. You see it coming from far off and you stand there anyway, because what else do you do? But I had not come here to be acknowledged in Marcus's speech. When the speeches ended, and the ribbon was cut, and the polite applause faded into the sound of 60 people beginning to circulate and network and congratulate each other, Dr. Nair slipped into the room and went to the small stage at the front. "Before we open the doors," she said, and the room quieted, "I want to introduce someone." I heard Marcus's voice from somewhere in the crowd, a sharp intake of breath, I thought, or maybe just my imagination. "Most of you received a program today," Dr. Nair continued, "if you'll open it to the inside cover." The rustle of paper, I pushed the door open and walked in. On the inside cover of the program, the one Dr. Nair had quietly redesigned 2 weeks ago, replacing the version Marcus had approved, there was a photograph. Elena and me on our wedding day, young and ridiculous, and so hopeful it was almost painful to look at. Below it, 4 sentences. This clinic was made possible by the full retirement savings of Mr. Harold Eugene Watts and the memory of his wife, Elena Mee Watts, who believed that a life well lived is one that leaves something behind for strangers. Mr. Watts asked for nothing in return. He is here today. Please welcome him. I don't know exactly what I expected to feel walking into that room. I had prepared myself for discomfort, for the particular awkwardness of a moment that no one in power had sanctioned. I had not prepared for the woman near the front, maybe 30 years old, holding a toddler on her hip, who started crying before I reached the middle of the room. "My son was seen here last week," she said, to no one in particular, to everyone. "He had an ear infection. We couldn't have paid for the urgent care. We didn't know where to go." She looked at me. "Thank you." Then the applause started, not the polite applause of a fundraiser, something else, something that came up from the floor. I found Marcus's eyes across the room. He was standing very still, and his face held an expression I recognized, the one he'd worn as a boy when he'd been caught in something he couldn't quite explain his way out of, and some part of him, the better part, knew it. I didn't glare at him. I didn't want a war. I had never wanted a war. I just nodded. He nodded back, and I watched something shift behind his eyes, something that looked, if I wasn't too old and too hopeful to read faces anymore, like the very beginning of shame, arriving where it had always been welcome. He came to my house that evening. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd signed those papers 18 months ago, and he didn't say much for a while. "Dr. Nair told me she'd talk to you," he finally said. "I should have figured." "She's a good doctor," I said. "She's going to do something real there." Marcus looked at his hands. "I didn't want you to be a liability, Dad. I didn't think," he stopped. "That's not good enough, is it?" "No," I said, "it's not." We sat with that for a moment. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something it would never catch. "Your mother would have hated what I did," he said. "Your mother," I said, "would have already forgiven you. She was faster at that than I am." Something cracked open in his face then. He put his head in his hands, this 50-year-old man who had once been a boy who cried when the neighbor's cat died, who had held Elena's hand in the hospital and not let go for 6 hours. He was still in there somewhere. "I'm sorry, Dad." I reached across the table and put my hand over his. My hand, old and spotted, and not as steady as it used to be. His hand, which I had held in a hospital 34 hours after he was born, when I was 20 years old and terrified and more in love than I knew a person could be. "I know you are," I said. "Now let's figure out how you make it right." The clinic's website was updated the following week. The new About page has a photo of Alina and me, the flea market mirror visible in the background, the yellow frame. There is a reading room for children waiting for appointments, and on the wall above the bookshelves, a small painted sign that reads, "The Alina Me Watts Corner." I am there every Tuesday afternoon. I read to the children while their parents wait. I am not a liability. I am not a distraction. I am exactly where $320,000 and one good woman's memory and 71 years of living were always meant to bring me.